Good evening, indeed. I watched you this morning about the fire in the Marines, right, or the SEALs.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker
one.
Carlson Tonight. One of the weirdest features of modern life has got to be how we've all been trained to ignore the things that really matter. You might have wondered, to pick one among so many examples, why hundreds of thousands of your fellow Americans seem to be living in squalor on the sidewalk. How'd that happen? These are the so-called homeless. Drugs have destroyed their lives. So where'd those drugs come from exactly, and why is no one asking? And speaking of chemicals, men in America seem very different from what they used to be. Anyone over 40 knows this. The changes are dramatic. You can't help but notice. Could those changes have something to do with the unprecedented drop in testosterone levels that scientists have measured repeatedly? And by the way, if that's happening, why is it happening? And so on. There's so many questions like this, but we rarely talk about any of them. Instead, we're told repeatedly to avert our gaze from the obvious and turn instead to CNN's latest fixation, whether it's a Chinese flu virus or George Floyd or some forgettable border dispute in eastern Ukraine. These are the issues they tell us we must care about. But they're wrong. These are not the most important issues. They're just news stories. The only remarkable thing about them is our willingness to believe they're more important than, say, Americans living outdoors
Well, you say
on
he's
the
actually
sidewalk,
the hard part to notice is
get married.
there's one of
There's
them in there
something a little
where it's
scary
like if
about
you're
watching
doing
this
it
happen.
media
It's like an
to
entire
isolate
population
individual media,
transfixed
is this a
by
box
issues
amongst
that ultimately
boxes
don't
and
really
fox in a
matter.
box, Roshinger's
How's
cat?
it going to work out? Well,
You'd
over
say
time,
Kudlow is
probably
usually
not
a bit
very
more
well.
Fed
Reality
business.
always
You would
reasserts
say
itself.
Judge
Twitter can
Janine
ban
is a
all
little
the
bit more
thought
of the
criminals at once,
legal,
but in the end,
civilian,
Twitter is not in charge of the future.
well, the middle
Nature
darkies and
is in charge of the future.
kind of
If you want
a
your country
retired
to
general
continue,
or
you have to answer nature's imperatives, which are the basics. Do you have enough water? Do you have a reliable food supply?
and you get
Can
that a lot
defend
here.
yourself from
This
invaders?
is something that the other
What
ones...
are you using for energy? How are you producing things and keeping
Guilford
warm?
touches on
Those
it,
are the
actually,
essential questions
but...
that any civilization must ask. Those and one other. How many people do you want living in your country? The size of your population matters very much. The size determines a nation's character.
Different types of
it often
reactors,
determines its fate. Yet we don't talk much about the size of our population. We probably should. The United States is growing faster than most Americans understand. If you were born in 1969, as some of us were, you arrived in a country with a little over 200 million people in it. There are now 334 million people in it. That's an awful lot of new people in an awfully short time. How many people is that exactly? Well, it's nearly twice the population of the entire western United States. That's 13 states, including California.
Something like that.
That is massive and incredibly rapid demographic growth. And it's accelerating. Immigration is now at the highest level ever recorded in American history.
What ours have to learn, regardless, because it's gravity information.
Over just the last year, roughly 2 million people from the third world came across our borders illegally. All of them arrived with the blessing of the White House. It makes you wonder what sort of economy Joe Biden imagines we're going to have going forward. Domestic manufacturing is in steep decline.
It's a nuclear
Automation
reactor,
is replacing many of the
and you have
low-skilled
nuclear
jobs
football,
that
and
still
you can't
remain.
handle hydrogen wave
So
function.
what are these millions of
And
new
that's a
people going to
joke,
be doing
because
for work 20
you're
years
not going
from
to ever
now?
really need
They
hydrogen
can't all be
wave
Nancy
function like
Pelosi's
that.
housekeepers.
You're going to need
They
Bernoulli's
can't all
version
bust
of
tables at the French
Bell's
Laundry
Equality,
in Napa.
or whatever.
And not all of them will,
Occam's
thank
razor
God.
you're dealing with.
In spite of the Democratic Party's best
shave
efforts to import
the
a
coin,
permanent
I
serf
guess.
class to serve its donors,
Deal with
some of these immigrants will
inflation.
rise
How
higher
would you
than
not
Nancy
to?
Pelosi expects they will. Some will fight their way to the top
There's
of our
dynamics,
society,
different
the usual
diagrams.
combination of
Earth
inborn
is
talent and
the
grit.
surface of the sun's dynamics.
And honestly, bless them for that. No one invited them here. We didn't want them to
Born and
come.
roll
But we will be sincerely
numbers.
glad when they succeed. And yet, a country is more than the success of a handful of people, inspiring as that always is to watch. Sheer numbers matter too.
Well, again, I just watched
Even
a number
if
about
every
Xi
single
Jinping,
person snuck across our southern
box in the
border
box,
this year
bringing
goes on
up
to win a Nobel
nuclear
Prize in
bombs in the
chemistry,
background,
it
buzzing
would still
Taiwan.
be
I threw
worth
that one.
worrying about the effects that mass immigration have on our total population numbers. So the question is, how many people is too many? In Washington, you will never hear that question.
They have electricity
More
in it,
bodies
don't they?
in a country mean more power for the people who
Crystal
run it.
silicon
Big
chip
nations need big
clock.
governments. Politicians always want more people to rule. So the incentive for unrestrained
the symbols in
population
which you describe
growth is
A
baked
or the
right into
direction in
system.
which it's...
That's bad news for the rest of us. First and most obviously, big governments don't treat their citizens very well. Yes, that's a Reagan-era talking point. It's also true
It's the killing
The
mockingbird.
larger a bureaucracy
Linguistics here.
becomes, the more
Oxygen
impersonal
into
it
gold,
gets.
silver
Past a
scales.
certain size, organizations of
however you
any
play it.
kind lose their regard for people. As they get bigger, they
Real
get
nitrogen.
blunter, more
And
soulless
if you
and
knew the number,
cruel.
pull out the dark
People in
matter,
charge
you
no
could
longer care
hear
what
it
you
out.
think. They don't have to
Instead
worry
of
about how
using
their policies will
Ocarija, you
affect
could
you
use
or
some
your
hack
family.
that's better in the
And that's
speedrun.
the inevitable product
cheaper.
of population growth. If you had 5 children, you would bathe them all in love and attention.
They all
If
slam
you
it
had
out, move
5,000
to
children, you
California.
wouldn't know their names. So in case you're wondering why our leaders no longer seem especially interested in your health or happiness or prosperity, that's the reason. They don't have to be
Why
interested.
Bluestone in New
Our
York?
population's too big.
Silica.
Why should your opinion matter? You're one of many. Previous generations of Americans didn't live in a country like this, and they would be stunned by the attitudes that are so common now, attitudes we take for
I got
granted.
moved here. I'm born here.
Arresting people for walking through the U.S. Capitol building? How is that a crime, 19th century
Now,
Americans?
now go figure, Sharps, right?
For most
Now
of
go
our history,
figure.
Americans
like
believed
I walk,
they
I have
owned
a
the
common
Capitol.
rule. I never had
They
a
thought it was
problem
theirs because
jaywalking
they
the
assumed
street
this
in
was
town in my
their
life,
country.
Hancock, right?
Political
No.
leaders told them that it
I
was.
moved to Arkansas.
After the 1904 presidential election, Teddy Roosevelt greeted voters
Who the
in
hell
person
is
on the
you,
lawn
kid?
of the White House. It was his home, he lived there, but it belonged to them. Attitudes like that are long gone. They're the victim of population
You
growth.
gotta earn that. You gotta pay
The
that due.
Athenians invented democratic government, but at its peak,
It
Athens
means work
only
on the
had
farm a
about
little harder, hold
8,000
the
voters.
post. If
So
it's
past a
grow
certain
corn
scale, democracy
and just
can't
watch the
function
kids so
very
they don't
well.
steal anything
The
and
concept
play
of
at
the
the
citizen
team.
becomes too
666,
abstract.
right?
You see it in the way our
33
leaders
is
talk.
the ball. 33 and a third
Politicians
is the
barely
boss at that
mention
point in time. And
individuals
really, if you
anymore.
didn't
Instead, they
factor
yammer
them
on
doing
about
anything
voting
bad
blocks,
for me to
which are
come
now
in and
called
say something when,
communities.
yeah,
The
hand it
immigrant
off, or
community, the
maybe there's some
trans
kid or
community, the
lieutenant,
Latino
obviously.
community, the black community. You hear these terms constantly, but they
They're
are
just
nonsensical. They
terms.
don't mean
Well,
anything.
number, a photon.
For example, there are about 47 million black people in the United States. That's a community?
Well,
No, it's
because
not.
change.
By
You'd say the
definition,
charge
47
on it
million
gives it
people
state
cannot
differential
be a community,
evolution.
no matter what color the people within it are.
if
How could
genetic
it be a community?
evolution's
They don't
not for
even know
you,
each
try
other.
robotics.
What you're
Neural
looking
net.
at is not a community, but
Change
47
little
million
differentials of the spin in which
individuals,
you
each created
covered
by
that
God
derivative
as
to be. You'd say
unique,
it's person,
each
it's
with
x, y,
opinions
f
and
over
interests
x.
and
That
preference
derivative
and
is
goals
derivative
that aren't
h,
quite the same
derivative
as
f,
anybody else's.
derivative
In other words,
t,
they're human
the
beings.
rest of field theory, free
People who run
particle
big
wave,
countries tend to forget
Schrodinger's,
that. When you're in charge of
hydrogen wave
hundreds of millions
function.
of people, you
There's
cannot
a lot of
help but to
different versions.
dehumanize them.
You go
Not that our
Stanford,
leaders
this is
have
their
ever had a
teacher.
problem with
MIT,
dehumanizing
this is
people.
their
In fact, they're
teacher.
strongly
And this,
for it.
what do they have in common?
A year and a
None of them are
half
the
ago,
same.
some
Not even
idiot
close.
kid from
I mean,
Harvard
like
wrote
the
a book
symbols may
demanding
even
that
be
the
close,
United States
but the
open its
first one
borders
here
to
is
an
the last one
additional
here.
700
Now that's acceptable
million
to a
new
certain
immigrants
degree.
from
What do you
around
mean?
the world.
What if it's the question,
If we did that,
the
he
answer,
argued in the
or the
book,
question and
we'd
the
have a
answer for the
population of
electron,
1 billion people,
the photon,
and that might
the
raise
gluon,
our GDP.
and
Wall
Higgs
Street
there.
would be thrilled. Also, of course, would be more
Well, here,
diverse,
we're
with more interesting restaurants.
putting some bones down,
Want
some
Sierra
dimensional
Leonean
analysis,
goat barbecue
packing the
delivered to
noise
your
and
pod at
equation, and
3
I'm
a.m.?
unfair because I'm
A billion
usually
people
hard
living
about
here,
this because
you
no
can get
graph
that
up
done.
here to
As
photon.
noted, the kid's a
That'll be
moron.
the
But in Washington,
using
here's the interesting
Pendrell.
part.
I do
No
it all
one
the
laughed
time.
at him.
Devil in the details.
Quite a few ostensibly smart
Sharps.
people agreed with
Put
this
a mark
thesis,
on you.
including
That's a
some
bunny.
prominent
It's got some
Republicans who
spin.
turned out to
It's
be
a
as
wave
dumb and
duality
reckless
on
as he is.
particles.
Apparently,
Photon.
none of them has ever spent
Change
time
in
in
field,
a crowded
change in
country.
field.
Anyone who
As you're
has
tracking
knows
the
how
tank round.
deranged it is to want 1 billion people here in the United
I'm going to
States.
put the cells in there
Mass
about the
population growth makes
combatives
life
before
worse
it goes
for
straight
pretty
to
much everybody.
cross-collar
That's
choker
the
or
main
flying
problem with
armbar.
crowded countries. They're hard to live
The
in.
topology
They're
might
loud
have
and
a banana
dirty
peel
and
on a
chaotic.
slope. They
There
have
is
to
no
factor
privacy, there is no open
protracted
space.
warfare
There are never
calculations,
enough
values
resources
in
to
those
go around.
models.
So
The
the
photons
culture
are dealing
tends to
about
become
directly.
hyper-competitive and
Here,
clannish.
we have an open entropy of
Crowding
the
is
last
bad for
moment
people.
from
It's
the
anti-human.
people
In a famous
in this
series of
Hadron
experiments
Collider
in the
that
late
had 5
1940s,
sigma,
a
the
researcher
temperature
called John
differential, or the
Calhoun
view of what it
forced a
was, or
group
at
of
least the
Norway
invert
rats to live in
model.
highly
So that
overcrowded
invert model
pens.
is again
And
gravity
almost immediately
and
the rats changed.
photon
They became
boson,
aggressive. Then they became
gluon,
psychotic. Ultimately, they
electromagnetism,
died.
gravity, electromagnetism
People
here,
aren't so different
inverted
from
pen.
them. They
Maybe we
need
deal in
room.
some people
That's why our ancestors
do
came to
gravity
America
numbers.
in the
Some
first
people
place
do
because there
gravity
was room
IH,
here.
FMA, not all once
You know
all
who still
day,
understands
Pongthor,
this?
topology,
Rich
Bell's
people
equality,
understand this. Ask anyone who's been
exclusionary
around the world that
principles,
knows what the
Minkowski
options
in
are. Ask,
space.
if you left the United States,
Those
where would
aren't
you
just models to jump
And
Evil
no one's
Knievel,
gonna
or
tell
for
you
you to not
Lagos
understand understand what they
or
are.
Mexico
They're
City, or even Singapore.
similar
If they're
pinships
being
from different
honest, they'll tell you
teachers
New
that
Zealand
run a
or Alpine
technique to
Switzerland. Those
tell
are
you what that
low-density places. They
duality
don't have a lot of
particle
other
looks like,
people in
Maxwell.
them. Why do billionaires buy
Amp,
huge boats?
Faraday.
Same reason. The
You
ocean
should be able
isn't
to hang
crowded.
parallel.
There's no one else
Bing,
there.
Bing, 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 right in there.
Uncrowded is good. Yellowstone is beautiful because it's empty. You don't have to be rich to understand
There's
this.
a
It's all
volcano
pretty
and it
obvious.
go
Really,
off.
only in a moment like this one, when the people with the loudest megaphones speak exclusively in lies,
To terrify
when
you,
we
the
need to be
power of how
reminded
it
of
controls gravity.
bigger is not always better. In fact, most of the time
Didn't
it
have a
is
plan
worse.
for that.
Have
Well,
you driven around your country recently?
I'd say things that
You
he
may have
wouldn't
noticed
about
there are
Makavas
fewer
and
and
old
fewer
countries and an
beautiful
asteroid
things in
rolling in
America.
across
You're not imagining
Antarctica.
It's real. Dollar stores are
Library
everywhere.
Alexandria. Well,
The
whichever.
question is, why is this happening? Well, the people in charge have no taste. That's part of it. They acquire, but they can't discern. For some reason, we put private equity firms in charge of the nation's aesthetics. Accountants are doing our exterior
born out
design.
in school.
That's
Nor
a
did
terrible
they train
idea,
me.
obviously. But it's not the core problem. The core problem
up on me on an
is
index.
that bigness is inherently
Let's say
ugly.
you had to roll
There's
into
never
a town,
been a
or take
beautiful
care of a log
skyscraper.
mill because
Every
they got
single
messed
one
up,
of
and there
them
I was
is an
standing with my boat
atrocity.
stucker.
The fact that people still pretend otherwise tells you how
Does
conditioned we have
what
become
commonly come
to
out of
disregard
there?
our own nature and
How
our
would
own
they see
natural
that?
longings.
Now,
Would
obviously,
you rather
for
wake up in a $30 million
as a
condo on
log
the
mill
top floor of
guy,
an office
you
tower?
would go, well, not
Or in a
reporter
log cabin in a
standards. and
pine forest? Wood stove
Maybe there's
glowing
a
as the
better
snow falls?
index for it anyways, and
That's
just come and
rhetorical
replace
question,
my
obviously. No
job.
sane
Mill
person would
videos
choose
that
the
they do
condo.
getting out there in MS-13
And yet we're
country
told the
in the
condo
jail.
is better. That's why it costs more. Because the building is bigger.
What did it take to bend
But
them?
how exactly
Tucker?
is its scale in advantage?
Probably not
How
much
is that
about some
appealing?
shock collar
Well, it's not.
bullshit and
In fact,
explaining
its scale
Walmart,
is
Walt
the problem.
Disney, Amazon.
Massive size is a threat, no matter what it is, always. In our bones, we understand this. Anything huge is inherently terrifying to us. Children run from
Watch
big
his pressure
things.
gauge for me, would you? I'll pay you
If there's an
15.
upside to the last 2 years of the COVID insanity,
You
and
do
there
it for
may
me
be,
better than that
it's
there,
that many
and
Americans seem to
respect
be
it. And I'm
remembering
like,
what
hey,
they
look, man,
long
we can't
for.
have
Look where they're
bodies,
moving.
bullshit,
Almost always
hits
it's to
that
someplace
aren't.
smaller. LA to
Like,
Austin,
I want to see the X's
New York
and
to
O's,
Burlington,
right? Before
Seattle
you
to
take out
Boise,
that buddy,
Chicago
and
to
like the
Naples.
cops in town are gonna
So it's
have
the
some
reverse
issues.
of any
Yeah,
other
lose
internal
you on that
migration we've
pressure
ever
gauge.
seen. Americans are moving from the cities to the farms, or at least to
Look,
the outer suburbs.
Any
They
brother
want more
out there, I'm gonna
nature,
tell you, he
more
actually
human
dropped
contact,
one
more
about.
trees, more quiet.
It was a disorder called
And it's hard to
something a
believe they'll
lack of
ever stop
gravity, but I
wanting
forget
these
what it's
things.
called.
Because they're
and
natural. They're the things we all want.
When we have
At
the
some
mass gap
point
in the
down the
mill,
road, you can
it
imagine
gives
young
you
people
gravity
setting
that you
out for
could
the
use
all
if
but
it was
abandoned
me
interior
being
of our
the
continent.
asshole.
Some of them may
Coming
figure
to,
out that a
it's all right. All
depopulation,
bullshit aside,
depopulated
that
Finnish
number
settler
right there
town on the banks of Lake Superior
is an
may be a
infrastructure
better
problem.
place
It's
to
going
live
to
and raise
crack this
children than
foundation
some
that's
sterile
coming
commuter
down,
parking
and I
lot
need
20
that
miles
building
from a
running.
crumbling metroplex. They could figure
Up or
that out.
down.
People aren't that
Let's
stupid.
be real.
They've just been misled. Economic forces
I
are going
would
to drive
have
this,
to.
by the way, as they
Like,
always do.
yeah.
For decades, our leaders have ignored the essentials: our food, our energy, our water, in favor of boutique
Like I said,
nonsense
what
that
you see,
improves
I
nobody's
do in
life.
the
Pregnant
mills.
flight
This
suits,
is the
ladies and
stone
gentlemen.
mill. Brought
These people are
thermodynamics.
ridiculous, and we're about to see the
Water
results
coolers, the
of
water
their
cooler.
long-standing negligence. Energy prices, for example, probably aren't going down.
Fish and
How
oil.
high are they going to go? Nobody knows. But at some point, it will
Well,
become very
can't
obvious
say
that
the
it makes
reporter
more
never
sense
fished
to buy your
before.
staples maybe nearby. More sense than it does
If
to
the
order them online
horizon
from a
limit there
warehouse
was frozen on the
across
surface,
the
so, like,
continent.
They're holding a fishing
So the
pole. I got one.
rising
on.
cost
There's
of
definitely one
transportation
in
is
there,
likely to
and
be
you're
permanent.
just
The world we
everywhere.
live in other words,
In
cannot last.
everywhere.
And that's not necessarily a tragedy. There's nothing wrong with setting down roots somewhere that's smaller.
Let me help you
It's
out.
not
No,
a bad thing to know the man at the grocery store or the ladies at the
It's hard to
post
be.
office.
I mean, there's
It's pretty
reasons.
nice, actually. It might even
Button
be an
toggle
improvement
switch,
over
but
Midtown Manhattan, believe it or not. Healthy societies are not
Gotta
at
run it a
all
few
like the
times
one
a
we are
year at
living in
least.
now. They're
Check
not
all your
impersonal.
your
They don't
weapons, make
exist
sure
to
they work in
maintain empires.
condition.
They exist to serve the human beings who live within them.
Reptiles,
They elevate their citizens.
zoo,
They don't degrade
or
them.
your
Now, obviously,
little
that's the opposite of the system we
coin-operated.
currently have.
What
The
do you
good
got?
news is the system we
Arlington,
currently have
Arlington
cannot last. It's too
chains and
perverse.
rails
It's too
for like
disconnected from the
challenge
natural
wildlife.
world.
Tyler,
So it
Tyler
will end.
Nolan, which got on Demo
And as
Ranch
it does
yesterday
end,
for
as we think
YouTube.
about how we want to live
Or
going
today,
forward, it's worth
they're
remembering that other
somebody
people
coming in
in
and write
the
a
end
rule about,
are all
oh,
that
you
matter.
can't have
Your
venomous
relationships
snakes in
are the sum of
Florida
your life.
because of a
Those
hurricane down there.
relationships
It's
start
like,
with your
well,
family. They move
it wasn't even
outward in
that. And I
concentric
got loose in a
circles. They
hotel that
include
wasn't
your
even this
friends,
guy. It's like,
your neighbors, and the
it
people you
wasn't
work
me.
beside.
You never seen my thing.
This is your
Those are
actual
cool
community.
protocols.
The human
And they
beings
would have
you
been
know
fine
personally,
if
the ones
you watched
love, the
mine
ones
and
you take
actually had a better
responsibility
index
for.
to write laws
And that can never
about.
be a very big
Get
group.
the marshmallow.
Hey,
out the
Sean
box.
Hannity here.
It's-
Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page.